Fire Emblem The Binding Blade can feel pretty by the numbers. While every game takes tropes from past entries, FE6 is particularly uncreative with how it goes about it. This, along with the inconsistent quality it supports, results in a pretty forgettable cast. It would be a lie though to say that there are no diamonds in the rough. Astolfo falls into the aforementioned traps in some ways, but also avoids them in others. I think this makes him interesting to talk about because he exemplifies FE6's strengths and weaknesses. He's your second thief, joining just a few chapters after Chad. Having your second thief join soon after your first is well-trodden territory, and while you can argue that that's a stretch, I'll have to ask that you forgive me for not giving this game the benefit of the doubt. However, he is unique in that he's a spy rather than a common thief. This is the first instance of a thief being anything more than just that, so it sets Astolfo apart from his predecessors by giving him a different role. There's also his stats. Looking at past thieves, Pern is really the only one with anything resembling competent combat stats. I like this as a wordless way of showing that Astolfo is more experienced than others. If I show you his stats next to Chad's, even with no other context, you can tell that he's been in the business longer. In his introductory dialogue, we get a good idea of his personality and motivation. He's irreverent to most, but seems to care a great deal for Hector and Lilina. He's a fun character to read, which I think helps hook players into wanting to learn more about him. Like most FE6 characters, he has no in-story dialogue after joining. Instead, we'll have to look to his supports to learn more about him. I'll start with Lilina. In their C support, it's reinforced that Astolfo likes teasing others and doesn't take himself too seriously. He also hints at his background, but leaves before giving too much detail. In their B support, we see them in the middle of a conversation about his first encounter with Hector. Astolfo got caught stealing, and instead of punishing him, Hector offered him a job for his skills. He tried making a run for it, but changed his mind. He then cuts himself off, much to Lilina's dismay. Astolfo finally finishes his story in their A support, where he says he got away initially before returning and taking Hector up on his offer. The purpose of this support is to give us Astolfo's backstory. It does its job well, but Lilina is very passive in these conversations. She barely even speaks, and when she does, it's often just a few words. While I wish she had more input, I do think there's merit to her role in the support depending on what you enjoy. For example, if you're a fan of Lilina, then it might be cute to imagine her excitedly listening to stories about her late father as told by one of his old friends. While it doesn't really teach you much about her, it's fan service that I can't really bring myself to get mad at. There are a few parts in Astolfo's retelling that seem like they may have been embellished, in particular when he describes Hector. I like to think that he's playing up the theatrics for Lilina's enjoyment. This would add a more soft dimension to his character, showing that he knows how much this means to her and he wants her to think that her dad was cool. Similarly to his introductory scene, I think this prose is just fun to read. I understand that this can be influenced by translation, but from what I can tell, Astolfo is a fun character. He has a lot more life to him than some others in this game. Next, I'll talk about his Barthe support, which is, not as good. In their C support, they each express their grief at not being able to save Hector. Slight spoiler here, but this is explored in much more depth in his Boris support. He also suggests to Barthe that there could be a traitor in the army. Their B and A supports are dedicated to deducing if Guinevere is a traitor. They come to the conclusion that she's not, and the support ends. I think this was meant to actually show Astolfo doing spy work. It does technically achieve this, but the support is still boring. Personally, Barthe does nothing. He doesn't contribute to any of Astolfo's work, he just stands around being paranoid. Maybe some people find it endearing how useless he is, but I don't really care for it. As for Astolfo, this isn't interesting to read because it's obvious that Guinevere is not a traitor. Maybe if this were Thracia, where there are actually characters who could realistically betray you, I'd be a bit more engaged, but I genuinely don't think there are any FE6 characters aside from Nime who are all that suspicious. I appreciate them trying to show him being a spy, but it ultimately falls flat. On the flip side, his Igrene support is the best in the game. Igrene suspects that Astolfo is her husband who disappeared many years ago. She tries to pry him for information, but he quickly shuts her down and assures her that he's not her guy. Make note of her mentioning that he had a scar on his leg. In their B support, Igrene talks about her and her husband's story. We had already learned that she saved him after he fainted in the desert and suffered amnesia. After he had healed, the two lived together and he slowly recovered his memories. This worried Igrene, but it wouldn't be long before he would disappear after going to fight off bandits attacking Arcadia. While she initially assumed he had died in the quicksand, she held on to hope that he may be alive. Astolfo tells her to forget about him and that if he is alive, his life probably isn't going too well. He then offers her a kiss, which is promptly rejected. In their A support, Igrene mistakenly calls Astolfo by her husband's name, Galroy, before showing him an emblem that had belonged to him. It was given to Lycian spies, and through this, Igrene is able to learn more about the occupation. Spies can't grow close to others because those people may be put in danger. After she says this, Astolfo states plainly that Galroy is dead. She briefly reflects on how their happiness must have been a dream before the conversation ends. This support is so good. We learn more about both characters and also see multiple sides to Astolfo's personality. We see the more playful and flirtatious side that we're used to, but we also see a more serious and even remorseful side to him. This could be his only support, and I'd still call him the best character in the game. He's given a backstory that connects him both to other characters and the game's setting, as well as presenting him as a multifaceted individual. I honestly have no complaints. This is a great support. I like how fleshed out his backstory is. Having a detailed past both with Hector and with Igrene helps him feel more storied. As well, the tragic tone of this support makes it stand out. He's normally a very jovial character, so this support gives him texture. A markedly worse support can be found with Wendy. Their C support is super short. Wendy makes note of him being further behind than he should be, to which he confesses to having a bum leg. Astolfo also pokes fun at her for being stocky, and the support ends. Their B support features the one thing of value in this entire chain. It's confirmed that Astolfo does have a scar on his leg, connecting this support to one with Igrene and proving that he is indeed Galroy. Their A support might be one of the most empty supports in this series. Wendy tries to lecture Astolfo about his alcoholism, but he runs away. End of support. Other than the leg thing, this support feels useless. Character traits can be reinforced through repetition, but Astolfo being a trickster is seen in every other conversation he's involved in. The confirmation that his leg is injured could have easily been inserted into any of his other supports. I guess there is a bit of an arc here for Wendy. She becomes more sensitive towards Astolfo's physical condition, and seeing her admit she was wrong is nice, but I feel like I'm picking at scraps here. I glance through Wendy's other supports, and maybe I should just consider myself lucky I don't have to talk about the one where she practices walking. His boar support, though, is actually quite good. Their C support is brief, with the drunken Astolfo being accosted by boars. I like to think that this line is meant to foreshadow the self-doubt that'll be tackled next. Astolfo apologizes for the death of Hector and takes the blame for everything that went wrong. This is the only time where we see him this vulnerable. It adds depth to his character by showing that he's genuinely distraught over what happened to Hector. Their support concludes with Boris telling him that all the Austrian knights share the blame. He makes it a point that Astolfo is indeed a knight, something which makes him tear up. This is a really sweet support. We could already infer that Astolfo cared a lot about Hector and Ostia, but this really hammers it in. You know, if an FE6 remake wanted to be cool, they could have a scene where Lilina properly knights him. This support accomplishes everything I wanted in a support between Astolfo and a fellow member of the Austrian military. They discuss Hector's death and Astolfo's role within the army while showing that he cares about his job. I also think it kind of subverts expectations. You would think that when speaking with Boris he'd be on his best behavior. However, this support is when he's at his messiest. It's really humanizing. Looking at all 5 of his supports, I think those with Barthe and Wendy could have easily been cut. It feels like the only reason they exist is because they're all Austrian, but I don't think that's a compelling reason. Brevity can be a boon, and cutting the fat can help focus the point of the narrative. Wendy's support adds so little that it can be easily inserted anywhere else, but getting to see Astolfo perform spy work is still worthwhile. My solution for this would be to give him a support with either Kath or Chad. I think I'd go with Kath. She's actually pretty similar to Astolfo, which could give him a unique personality to bounce off of since none of its other support partners are like that. You could teach her about thievery and spy work, and maybe they could work together to learn about burn or something. Haven't mentioned that he's not as agile as her due to his injured leg, and I think my little fanfiction here could achieve what the Barthe and Wendy supports achieve in less words and with a more interesting dynamic. We'd get to see him be a mentor to and try to keep up with someone who's essentially a younger version of himself. The theming of FE6's story is not at all its strong point, but it's still present. Roy, the ultimate victor, is able to forgive Aiden and move on, whereas neither Zephyr nor Jan move on from their past traumas. I think it can be argued that Astolfo adds depth to this scene by showing a bit more of a nuanced example of how someone can handle their past. He's very eager to move on from his relationship with Igrene, but it's not triumphant. This is clearly still haunting both of them, and it ends on a somber note. One thing he hasn't moved on from, though, is Hector's death. He falls apart when talking about it with Boris, and while he's able to look forward, he's still struggling. The lack of a clear-cut answer for how he should handle this is what I think makes it nuanced. Trying to forget it all happened won't help him, nor will being chained to it. Overall, though, I doubt that the writers were trying to connect him to these themes like this. After all, when writing 54 playable characters, it makes sense not to stick to one single theme. Astolfo has a set of well-written supports that give him a fleshed-out backstory and a unique set of personalities to bounce off of that characterizes him as a generally lighthearted person who's still capable of taking himself seriously. While a couple of bad supports and a somewhat unimaginative role in gameplay would be enough to hamstring some characters, Astolfo's writing is strong enough that he still stands as one of FE6's best.